So, Jason, in an earlier episode, you laid out the risk associated with static APIs.
Static API keys, yes, sir.
Static API keys, excuse me, that's what I meant to say. We promised that we would talk about alternatives, more secure ways to do it. So let's talk about certificates as a more secure alternative.
Tim, we're going to talk about 3 different layers of alternatives.
Okay.
And one of those is, remember, the reason why there's so many alternatives and the reason why it's good to think about many alternatives is because agents and workloads in general are going to be doing a lot of different things in a lot of different places.
Gotcha. So to just say what you're saying here, you're saying I may actually be choosing different alternatives based on the circumstances.
In your enterprise, whoever y'all might be, you might use all of these.
Okay.
Right? So, so there's not one's better than the other. It's just every use case is specific. So, Tim, in many cases, this is something that you and I have talked about, and I don't think we've emphasized enough. When we're talking about workloads and we're talking about agents, we are talking about essentially robots, machines, automated things, if you will, non-human identity.
Sure.
And part of what you want to do with a non-human identity is to give it an authentication mechanism that's native to a machine. I'm starting this podcast off with what is ridiculous and dumb and don't do it.
Okay.
Number one, static API keys are the equivalent to username and password in terms of how easy they are to steal by the bad guy.
Yep.
Number two, how did we solve that with human beings? Things like multi-factor authentication.
Yeah.
I actually had a question from a journalist recently, which was, hey, Jay, do you think we could use MFA to solve this whole security problem with agents and workloads?
Well, at the broadest sense, the definition of MFA is multi-factor authentication. So if your point is, can we have a different factor in there, which could be a certificate, then I'd say the answer is yes. If we're talking about what most people think of as MFA solutions, I think the answer is no.
In fact, Tim, we are going to talk about things that technically are multi-factor.
Right. It's multi-factor by definition, but that's not what they mean.
Exactly.
They mean off-the-shelf products, certain set of them, and they know what they are.
You're not going to get your agent or your Kubernetes cluster container to pull its phone out of its back pocket.
My Kubernetes cluster doesn't have a fob on its keychain. Right. Yes.
So it's funny to hear people talk about MFA in non-human identity scenarios.
Right.
So what is best for a machine is for it to be in possession of something that a bad guy can't copy. And if they do copy it, it's not useful in the adversary's hands.
Right. Yes.
So that right there is the definition of what you want to give a machine. Lo and behold, Tim, PKI has been around 30 plus years.
Yeah.
It turns out PKI saves the day again in all those scenarios.
Right. Yes. So which is technically multi-factor, right?
It definitely is at least one factor.
Right.
All right. So, and it might be all that's needed in certain use cases.
Sure.
So let's give one of them.
Okay.
Just a good old-fashioned cert from a private certificate authority.
Yep.
Can be used for the purposes of authentication.
Sure.
In fact, I bet you a lot of publicly trusted EKU certs, EKU of the client authentication type, which are going to be deprecated.
They will be.
You and I have talked about this.
Yeah.
I bet you a lot of them are being used right now to authenticate workloads. A whole bunch, I'm sure, are used for that purpose.
Yeah.
And won't be in the future. So therefore, that use case, except in the future with a private certificate authority, same thing. In other words, that use case of handing a workload a certificate for the purposes of, it could even be doing signing, but in reality, most of the time it's going to be setting an encrypted mutual TLS session, encrypting data in transit, and and authenticating itself. Here's who I am. I'm in possession of this certificate. Please let me in, right?
Yeah.
Authentication. But let's talk about layer 2.
Okay.
So yes, you're using a cert. You're using some kind of provisioning technology to get the cert to where it needs to be to the agent. But let's say now you want to be able to have a bit more control over the identifier of who it is that's actually doing the authentication. And that's where something like SPIFFE comes in.
Okay.
We've talked about SPIFFE in a previous podcast, and that identifier that's baked into the certificate allows you to start doing things such as have allow lists in policies. And, typical PKI, the way that you and I have seen it done for years and years, you merely have to be in possession of the cert.
Right.
But in this case, it's not just the mere possession of the cert. It is, no, you were the agent, the workload, were handed a cert, and you have a specific identifier. And why would you want that identifier? You want there to be an allow list of, yes, I want you and not anybody else to log in.
Right.
Also, if you're auditing,
is there a concept of permissions? Could I say you can do this thing, but not that thing?
authorization.
Right.
So, Tim, you and I have talked for years about the 3 legs of the stool of PKI.
Right.
Encryption, signing, authentication.
Yeah.
We almost always leave out authorization. And in reality, SPIFFE, along with SPIRE, but SPIFFE alone, with the identifier baked into the certificate, allows for things such as authorization. PKI enables authorization.
Right. So if my policies are sufficiently sophisticated, and if I have some kind of policy engine that can interpret those in reality, then I could actually tighten down what any individual agent can do to only the set of things I would want it to be able to do, which would definitely minimize the attack surface, reduce the attack surface considerably. Yes?
Massively.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden, you're starting to use principle of least privileges.
Yeah. Right. On agents.
On agents.
Yes. On workloads. Yes.
So
fantastic.
So therefore, zero trust as a marketing buzz term.
Right.
You're now like compare and contrast static API keys to now, this is just podcast 1 about alternatives.
Yeah.
And your mind's already opening up, Tim, to this idea of, wow, I have the strongest authenticator possible.
Right.
And now I can actually start to narrow down my privileges.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you say principle of least privileges. You almost imagine you should probably start with no privileges and just turn on the privileges you want to grant and say, look, for this process, we're going to need to be able to do this set of things. But there's absolutely no reason whatsoever that you should have access to the vast majority of my business and my systems. You have no right to be looking at this data or in these processes or dealing with financial or whatever you've got. You have no right to get anywhere near that. So I'm just going to close all of that off, and you literally can't get there. Right?
That's it, Tim.
Yeah.
That's it. So there are several ways in which you can narrow down entitlement, not the least of which is the API that you're exposing to this agent, which quite often is going to be an MCP server or something like that. You can cut down what that MCP server is allowing to happen.
Okay. Yeah.
However, it's a lot better if you can have not just an agent that's in possession of a cert for the purposes of authentication or standing on mutual TLS. The next level is SPIFFE.
Yeah.
Right? SPIFFE is what's allowing you to have that more complex entitlement policy.
Yeah.
Because it's the identifier of the thing doing the calling is right in the cert, which is great. But Tim, not every use case is going to be able to allow for a certificate to be given to an agent.
Okay.
A lot of agents are still going to be using tokens. However, and I think this is going to be the next podcast, Tim, how do you protect those tokens so that if they're merely copied by the bad guy or somehow found in the clear on a network, or you by mistake put it somewhere where a bad guy gets a hold of it,
leaked by your AI,
it could be leaked by code.
Yeah.
So many different ways in which these API keys leak. What I would say to you is that yes, there are solutions where you don't have to use a certificate directly with the agent, but you can use a token that is a lot less vulnerable than a static API key.
Okay. All right. Well, let's return to that. Okay. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you, Tim.